Welcome to BizTech's Leadership Conversation Show. Today we speak to Tim McCartney. He's the Senior Vice President of CoachHub Asia Pacific. Now, CoachHub is the leading global talent development platform that enables organizations to create personalized, measurable, and a scalable coaching program for the entire workforce, regardless of department or seniority level. Now, Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
Now, Tim, give us an overview of your rather interesting background and how you got the role at CoachHub.
Thanks. Happy to. I mean, Brian, I think I'm in the role that I was designed to be in for the stage of my career, which is the opportunity to build something great in Asia Pacific for a solution, which I think is really important right now. And we'll spend a bit of time talking about that. But prior to doing so, I've been in the fortunate position of building commercial teams predominantly across international markets. I started my career with a company called CEB, which is now part of Gartner, over in London. So after university, I traveled around a bit, ended up in London, and was consulting with HR directors at the time across some of the biggest companies in Europe and South Africa, and was pulled over to Australia, to our Sydney office, as we were building a new team there. So I was able to take on a couple of different initiatives and projects, and spent another 6 years or so with the organization in Sydney. And I've spent the last 5 or 6 years here in Singapore, where I've been working with large international businesses like Global Data, the fastest growing business intelligence platform on the London Stock Exchange, and then Miller Heiman Group, one of the world's leading sales effectiveness and methodology organizations, which was then acquired by Korn Ferry. So prior to joining CoachHub, the most recent role I had was leading the Korn Ferry digital business, which is the HR tech suite of solutions that are offered through the consulting and talent acquisition offerings at Korn Ferry.
Now, a very interesting background, and I'm going to come back to that a little later in the show. But I want to talk about coaching in general first, because coaching has gone from something that's a nice to have and something really quite fuzzy that in the last 2 decades to something that is a complete must have across all levels. Mm-hmm. Walk us through the evolution of coaching.
I think what you touch on is right, Brian. I think, even 8 or 9 months ago, when I took on the opportunity at CoachHub and started to have conversations with executives here in Asia and the Asia Pacific region, there was still a bit of misconceptions around what is coaching and who coaching should be offered to and why. And that does speak to the evolution. In fact, if we go back to sort of the studies on workplace coaching in the 90s, it was seen as a remedial tool. If you were offered or asked to participate in some kind of coaching initiative, the question that you would commonly ask yourself is, will I get fired? Is this my path
is
to
this
getting
part
fired?
of a performance improvement plan?
That's exactly it. And then in the 2000s, we started to see that it was around sort of changing others. So, if you're offered coaching, it's that my boss wants me to change. So my managers observe something in me and I need to change, which again still feels like that performance management rhythm that you mentioned earlier. In the last decade or so, there's been an evolution to the leader as the coach. And I explicitly remember this one. It's that notion that your manager is the one who can coach you. So you don't need to go and get external support. A leader should be the only one who gives you that kind of advice. And I remember being in the back of a taxi in Paris one day, having met with an HR director at one of the large construction firms there. And after the meeting, I was sitting in the taxi and my manager said to me, "Great, let's debrief," and asked for my feedback, and then immediately said, "Let me give you my feedback. Please take note. This is me coaching you," right? So it's that whole notion of the leader is the one who's coaching you. And today we're in a completely different mode where, there's a lot of people out there who consider themselves a coach. We can get different types of learning opportunities from everyone. And that whole idea of coaching at scale, right, at organizations of any level is really becoming something that's important given great resignation and the war for talent and the expectation that employees want and demand more.
Okay, Tim, and before we go into that, I want to first zoom in a little bit about coaching and executive coaching. Because right now, as you said, there's a cultural shift. There's a lot more emphasis, especially even in the Asia Pacific region, on executive coaching. But there are also different cultural nuances in different markets that prevent effective coaching. For example, the cultural nuance that basically you are coached by someone who's older than you as opposed to younger people. Where have you seen, especially in your background so far, whether it's Korn Ferry or now at your current role at CoachHub, which markets do you think that senior executives are a little bit more receptive to coaching versus other markets?
Great question. Executive coaching is something that will continue to grow and continue to be important, right? So there's always been this emphasis of coaching in the business world on the top few, right? Executive, C-suite, perhaps a high potential leader who's taking on a specific initiative. And organizations have invested a lot of money on buying or hiring very expensive coaches who travel and spend a lot of time with those C-suite. And to be honest, that won't necessarily change. We don't believe that model is failing. We think that's great. And we think that there are specific reasons and times for that to serve a purpose. Where coaching has an even wider impact is across all levels of the organization. I think that's where you're coming to, whereas there's this notion that if I'm a first-time manager, for example, a coach should not be someone who's, my peer experience or my peer age. A coach should be, an older, gray-haired person with a whole bunch of experience. And my comment back to that would say, I think we're not really clear on what is coaching, because that's typically actually what a mentor relationship should be. And there's plenty of organizations, particularly here in Asia, that frame coaching as something that's actually mentorship. And that's a completely different objective. And mentor is guiding someone's career based on the experiences they've had, which I guess is that white-haired analogy you mentioned a moment ago. Whereas a coach plays a fundamentally different role because they're helping to inspire something within and not actually telling. It's helping to inspire and initiate and question such that the coachee, the participant, can come to those conclusions or those decisions themselves. So it's a completely different frame of mind. And it is one that we spend a lot of time educating clients and businesses on as we take the CoachHub story to market.
Okay, so Tim, then, how is digital coaching disrupting the traditional coaching landscape? Because what it does, which you alluded to, is really democratize coaching.
Yeah. Well, I think coming back to the comment that I mentioned around executive coaching, that served a purpose, but it's because of the high cost and the time it takes to coordinate this. It means it's only ever for a select few. So as we know, in this whole world of digital disruption, anything that you can digitize can make things simpler. And so what we've effectively done is match coaches with employees of all different sizes through AI algorithm, big data algorithms that help that employee find their perfect coach. And we've created a system, a very simple system, where you're able to access a platform and have unlimited conversations with that coach anytime that you're both mutually available. And so you effectively have a coach in your pocket at any one time. And that's what's disrupted the game, right? So before, organizations were only ever able to invest in the top few. Now, because we've made it a cost-effective, streamlined technology platform, we can provide this at scale at any time that makes sense to any organization and at any level of the organization, regardless of age, experience, tenure, etc.
And obviously that's fascinating because, again, it allows you to build your own timber in a much more cost-effective manner. What's your business model like? How do you charge customers?
Yeah, so we operate on a license model, and so we tend to find that organizations are putting cohorts of their leaders, for example, or in some instances their entire employee population through an opportunity to experience coaching with CoachHub. And provide an ongoing personalized experience. So effectively, we're transforming the way that organizations think about learning and development, right? So gone are the days of, only offering classroom training, or perhaps recently we found organizations just offering e-learning. We know that a lot of that doesn't necessarily stick. And these days, employees are demanding more. They want a personalized experience. They want to feel like they're getting personally developed. That's really where coaching can come into play if you offer it at scale across your organization.
Okay, and then I'm going to now zoom in on talent, because you hit the nail on the head in terms of employee expectations, especially now in Asia. Now, the global trend now, and it's no different in Asia, is the Great Resignation. Tell us about that. What's driving that in Asia, and how is it different from the West?
The Great Resignation certainly is, in very simple terms, driven by employees who are feeling unhappy and discontent, right? I think if you reflect on the last couple of years, we've lost jobs, we've built families, we've reorganized ourselves for the hybrid workforce. We've had to juggle our life around our work. And especially today, we're starting to see organizations make some pretty hard decisions in terms of how and where people work here in Asia. You know, it's that constant battle of, do I bring people back to the office or not? And unfortunately, people feel a bit fatigued. Employees feel a bit fatigued by what we've experienced the last couple of years. And so it's led to rates of stress and anxiety and depression skyrocketing, right? Employees are ultimately, in many places, feeling very burnt out and disengaged. They're feeling quite lost. So this has been a global phenomenon, right? And in fact, there's been some data here in, say, Singapore and Malaysia, et cetera, to say that the rates of the Great Resignation are not as significant as they are in other areas. However, when you start to unpick that, I saw a recent article in Malaysia that said the under 35 population is significantly churning. So we're seeing significant turn of millennials in terms of their expectations in the workforce and looking for something better. And if we think about that as business leaders, have we perhaps forgotten that generation of the workforce, right? Have we actually left them behind because we just assumed that they'll be coming along for the ride in terms of the, you know, the Zoom calls and then the consideration to come back to the office? So it is a really interesting problem, and it is quite a dilemma, and one that we believe that organizations really do need to take action on to demonstrate that they're committed to their people and to act much more aggressively in what is clearly a war for talent out there.
Earlier on, you alluded to the Great Resignation, but now I want to talk about CoachHub's recent partnership with EMCC Global. Now, this is all around coaching and to enforce industry ethical standards globally. Tell us what this partnership means to coaching.
Brian, through our strategic partnership just announced with EMCC Global, our intention is to raise professional standards in the coaching industry. It's a first of its kind partnership. It's lasting for 5 years, and we'll be doing some research and development on improving digital coaching standards across the globe. This is something I feel personally passionate about. I think, you know, it's very easy these days for many people out there to claim that they're a coach. We have very, very high standards in terms of who we would accept into our coach pool. And we're working with the EMCC Global, who is a professional membership body, whose role is to set ethical and accreditation standards for the industry as a whole. And so our objective here is to enable the EMCC with webinars and other digital resources, giving coaches access to expert knowledge and experience, which is really, really needed. And ultimately, together, we'll be setting a new bar for expectations of what you can expect to receive through any kind of coaching opportunity.
Now, Tim, so I see the complete value in that, because there are coaches out there and there are coaches out there. There's a lot of different standards in terms of coaching. You know, the 21-year-olds who've just graduated out of uni with no practical experience selling coaching services. And there really needs to be standards, really. How are you, with this partnership with EMCC Global, what sort of certification are you working on in terms of giving people the comfort level that the coaches that they are basically employing are of a certain standard?
We have a leader of our coaching lab, Professor Dr. Jonathan Passmore. He's the SVP of coaching here at CoachHub. He's also an academic at Henley. He'll be working directly with EMCC Global's research committee on a number of different projects to this regard. The first aim is to develop a more inclusive and innovative coaching industry, and together with Jonathan, he'll run a number of events, work on some coach surveys, and collaborate in developing the global code of ethics. And to your point, Brian, there around what are the requirements, I guess, of being a certified B2B coach? We take that very seriously at CoachHub. We get countless applications each day of coaches who are looking to be associated with the CoachHub mission and vision and be part of our family. But we have a very high bar in terms of what we expect. We have a minimum expectation of accreditation. They're PCC with the ICF, International Coaching Federation. They have to have had at least 6 years clear management experience, and they have to have completed over 500 hours of individual coaching. So we set the bar really high ourselves in terms of what we put out there, and that's because of the pride that we and our founders and investors have for the brand. But our partnership with EMCC is our opportunity effectively to give back to the wider industry, which we believe is a critical industry for this generation and moving forward.
Now, Tim, what are some key trends that you see in the HR space in 2022 and 2023?
Well, there's a lot going on. I think that's understated. On top of the notion of inflation and the political climate, etc., the response to the post-pandemic world, HR leaders certainly have a lot going on. And one of the key things that I would say, particularly to this audience, is that it's clear that CEOs and business leaders are caring a lot more about workforce issues. In fact, in a recent Gartner survey, CEO interest in workforce moved up 2 places. The third most important trend that they care about going into this and next year, and that's looking at all things around diversity, inclusion, attraction, retention, etc. We work a lot with learning and development executives, and the biggest issue we see is around digital transformations that simply ignore the need to bring people on the journey, right? And largely that's because we focus on the systems versus thinking about people, mindset, behavior change. 80% of people in APAC agree that coaching is considered an effective method versus classroom training and individual development plan, but it's not used as frequently as it's needed in terms of succession and leadership planning programs and around digital training. And linked to that, I would say the second trend that we would see is that these traditional approaches to learning, then classroom training, for example, or e-learning, they need to be significantly and severely updated. This tick the box exercise that we are simply giving learning or giving development opportunities to the population as a whole, it's not resonating with employees today who, as we said earlier, are simply demanding more. And in fact, research has long told us that most of what you learn in the classroom is forgotten within 2 weeks of leaving the room. In fact, after 6 days, 75% of what you've forgotten, of what you've learned is forgotten if you haven't found a way to apply that, right? So we're seeing the training sort of landscape needing to change, and overall from an HR point of view is this, and a business point of view is that employees are demanding more. Employees want more. They want to feel that they're working in a purpose-driven, a values-based environment that promotes balance and that trusts. And for the horrors and the experiences of the last few years, I mean, that's a very easy ask for employees to demand of their employer in today's environment.
Now, Tim, I want to take a completely different approach now, and I want to zoom in on you, because looking at your LinkedIn profile, you've had an outstanding track record of sales leadership and growing businesses across multiple markets. So I have 2 key questions for you that will help businesses in different stages of growth. Now, first question is really, what are some of the key things that a company that is moving from startup mode, where basically they've already got product market fit, they've got their customers, it's now time for them to move to scale up mode? What are the foundations that they need to do in order to scale their business rapidly? And I ask you this because you've done this before.
I have had the opportunity to build teams before, and I think building teams within a large enterprise is certainly a different experience to building and creating something as part of a startup world, which is where I'm fortunate to be playing today at CoachHub. So, I joined CoachHub and there were 10 people scattered across Asia Pacific region. We've now created our regional headquarters in Singapore, and we have 100 or so of our team members from Melbourne to Mumbai to Seoul to Shanghai and Tokyo, and of course here in Singapore where I am based. And it's certainly been a big ride, right? Like I think there's been a lot of trying to corral and think and go fast. I told many people that I spent the first couple of months 4.5 days a week recruiting. So I think to answer your question, number one is finding great people, right? And that speaks to the war for talent. But I can tell you, having had conversations with a number of interested candidates and people wanting to come on the journey, there's also a bit of hesitation, right, on whether do I step into this scale up mode and this type of organization, especially if you're coming from one of the larger enterprises. So one of the key things once you've found your market fit, your target audience, etc., is finding people, having a vision, communicating that vision, being very, very transparent in where you're trying to get to, and ensuring that you're always having a pulse on the mindset, the engagement, and the purpose. So whether people are feeling that they're coming along that journey with you, because oftentimes founders or leaders, we're operating far ahead of where the people on the front line are, and our objective, and certainly what I've started to learn, is how to operate ahead, but make sure you're pulling and bringing people along with you. And
Absolutely.
The best way to do that is through transparency.
That's great advice. Now I'm going to wear a different hat now. I run a multi-million-dollar established business. I'm a CEO that's scratching his head because I'm only growing. I'm growing nicely. I'm growing at 5 to 7% every year on year. But really, I look at other industries or other opportunities around me, and companies are growing at 30 to 40% per year. What advice would you give me as a CEO from a sales perspective? Because you've done that again in a different job.
I have, Brian. I have consulted with a number of the largest organizations, and certainly, promote the advice that we were preaching at that time, which is be very clear on your ideal customer and be very focused on your sales force and the vision, and ensure that you've got a very clear methodology that you're using across that organization from a selling point of view, right? Whatever that methodology might be, just have one and stick to it and adopt it and get it throughout the organization. But I'll layer on top, right now, and it speaks to our conversation today. It's so true in today's world. It is all about mindset, right? So if you can ensure that you are keeping the pulse on the mindset, that you are engaging your people, that you're getting the best out of your people, you'll find a way to retain and engage them far better than having to worry about your balance sheet, right? The cost of losing people, the cost of acquisition, talent acquisition today is through the roof. It's astronomical. So your ability to retain, engage, develop these people, these assets, all people of your organization, not just the top few. That's what's going to set you apart. And that's certainly where we see results with the clients that we're working with today, who are seeing greater levels of engagement, retention. They're seeing a workforce that's engaged and feels invested in. And that would be my commitment and suggestion in terms of how you get to 30%.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Now, but before you leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Today, it's time to rethink people development. Right, the notions and the motions that we've had for the last 3 years, but importantly, the last 40, 50 years, they're ready to be disrupted. And you need to think about how to engage your workforce in that model, so that they always remember those years and that time that they spent with your organization as being the most critical in terms of establishing their career and their sense of self.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Tim McCartney, Senior Vice President of CoachHub Asia Pacific. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.